want to first of all thank you all for coming out. I'm Dr. Sharon Austin, Director of the African American Studies Program and also Associate Professor of Political Science. Tonight we're very honored to have Dr. Michael Jeffries speak as part of our two-day symposium on President Obama. Also tomorrow, Dr. Frederick Harris will also speak. So I want to make sure that I'm as brief as possible so that Dr. Jeffries can have plenty of time to give you a presentation about the research for one of his books. But I first want to make just a few announcements. If you're here for extra credit, either for my class or for anyone else's, there are 2 sign-in sheets on the table that are right here in the back with the blue tablecloth. So just make sure that you sign that and write down the professor's name, and we'll keep those sheets and send them to the professors. Also, there are some refreshments upstairs in the reading room, which is directly upstairs on the 2nd floor. So feel free at any time to go and help yourself to refreshments. I want to first of all begin by thanking our staff who made this possible for us this evening, who worked very hard. Our work study student, Onicia Burton, I think she is up there, so we can't see you. There she is. She's waving to you. But Onicia Burton, and also Ms. Sharon Burney, who is our program assistant, who is, why are y'all up there? Who is right, waving, who is right upstairs. So thank them for the food and for setting everything up. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Bob Graham Center. Senator Graham is here tonight, and also Dr. David Colburn and Gail and Sherry and Shelby. Thank you very much for letting us use the Acora this evening. I also want to thank another co-sponsor, the Center for the Humanities and Public Sphere, who gave us a research grant that made it possible for us to have this two-day symposium from their Yabits Fund. I don't know if any of them are here this evening. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Harry Shaw, who is in the back. Thank you. Who was an Associate Dean for Minority Affairs here and a professor here for many, many years, who is one of our staunchest supporters in African American Studies. So thank you very much, Harry. And I also want to acknowledge all of the African American Studies faculty who are here. If you could please stand. Come on, y'all. Zahara, please stand. Well, you don't have to. You don't want to. Zahara Simmons, Ibram Kendi, Evan Hart are also here. So I want to just go ahead and just tell you a few things about Dr. Michael Jeffries. He received his bachelor's degree from Swarthmore College. He received his doctorate degree in African American Studies with an emphasis in sociology from Harvard University. His first book was entitled Thug Life, Race, Gender, and the Meaning of Hip Hop. He will be giving a presentation tonight from his second book, Paint the White House Black, Barack Obama and the Meaning of Race in America. Tonight he'll be talking about the chapter that deals with Michele Obama as Superwoman. He is currently an Associate Professor of American Studies at Wellesley College. And currently his research, he's working on research on the labor of comedy and looking at the intersections of race and gender and the way that it is expressed in comedy. So without further ado, I want to introduce and welcome Dr. Michael Jeffries.
Thank you for that generous introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here and for the Graham Center and the Humanities Center for having me. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the book, and then more specifically about Michele Obama as Superwoman, right? So the title of the book, Paint the White House Black. Not sure if you can tell, but that is a black White House. Here's where I begin. Here's where I begin the book, with this idea that race is a bit of a public secret. It's something that we all know about. Race and racism are things that we all know about, but are often afraid to discuss in public. And the reasons that it remains such a secret, such a taboo topic, are varied. And I want to focus on 3 here just to begin. One is that there's a fear of repercussion for talking honestly about race and racism. And that's a very real fear for those of us who are concerned about injustice along these lines, right? It's the sort of fear that prevents you from speaking up when someone you don't know makes a racially insensitive remark. It's the sort of fear that prevents you, if you're on a train. I ride a commuter train to the Boston suburbs, and I'm often the last person that someone else in the train will sit next to on the train, right? And my gut says, to stand up and say, why are you being so racist? Why are you so afraid of me? Sit down, right? But if I say those kinds of things in public, those thoughts, if I let them out in public, I'll be branded as crazy or angry or whatever it might be, right? So there's a fear of repercussion, right? That's one reason that race remains a secret. Second, race is a public secret because oftentimes when racial appeals are made in politics, and I'm drawing here on the work of political scientist Tali Mendelberg and others, when racial appeals are made in politics, they are made implicitly rather than explicitly. So when Obama was running, you had folks calling him the food stamp president, right? Rather than just calling black folks lazy, there's a kind of implicit appeal to racial fears and racist sensibilities, right? So that's another reason that race remains below the surface. And third, and this is the jumping off point for the rest of the book, it's that even if we have good intentions, and even if we have the courage to talk about race, we run into trouble with racial language. The language we use often proves inadequate for describing the problems and the solutions that we want to work on. So how do we get around this trouble with racial language, right? The idea that there's always something left unsaid about race, as Stuart Hall said. This is how we get around it. This is how we work on this racial language problem, with the idea of intersectionality, right? One of the great theoretical and intellectual gifts of the black feminist movement and scholarly tradition, right? And intersectionality is this idea that race is always working in combination with some other discourse or social force for its power and its meaning. This is a meme from the internet, and is anyone a big SpongeBob fan? Maybe you can speak to the intersectionality of SpongeBob better than I can, but from what I can gather, many of the problems and sort of resolutions in SpongeBob revolve around kind of unresolved issues of working class masculinity. So there's a class component to SpongeBob and a gender component to SpongeBob, and he's often trying to balance out these kind of competing pieces of his identity. And thinking about identities in these different kind of pieces, right, these overlaying, these intersecting ways, that's the core idea, that whenever we think about race, whenever we think about how racism maintains its power, we've got to talk about it in concert with class, gender, and other social forces. Michele Obama provides a perfect example for us to do this. Before getting to her as a symbolic figure, we should talk a little bit about the role of the First Lady in general, because it's a unique position. In a sense, we do vote for the First Lady because we vote for her spouse, or the first spouse, because we vote for the president. We have the assumption that this person will move into the role. But unlike other public officials, right, her duties are not clearly prescribed. So the office of the First Lady, the role that she has played, has changed over time. But one thing that has remained constant is her value as a symbol of American femininity, a symbol of a kind of moral restrictions and expectations around gender roles. So she is, by definition, a symbolic figure, and she just happens to be a remarkably important and beloved symbolic figure. But she's actually a massive departure from many of the other kind of symbols of black womanhood that we've seen historically. And I'm drawing here on two classic black texts from the black feminist tradition. One by Collins, right? Traditional Collins, Black Feminist Thought. The other by Michele Wallace, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. And Collins says, there are these stereotypes that dominate American history that we have about black women, right? These four controlling images, these four controlling stereotypes. The angry matriarch, the Jezebel or the whore, the welfare mom, and the mammy. Right? And these four images would all revolve around black women's sexuality and their class position and their relationship with their family and black politics as a result. Those four images have come to dominate the way black women are represented in American popular culture. But this Superwoman image that I'm going to argue actually updates in some ways, those four older representations, can be traced back to Michele Wallace's work. And Wallace makes a very important and a very brave point. She's writing in the late 1970s, early 1980s as most of her work. And she says one of the stereotypes that she has to deal with, the expectations that she has to deal with, is that she has this infinite reserve of emotional strength in addition to the capacity to serve as a contributing sort of financial force in her family. The expectation that she is Superwoman, that she is invincible, is a very seductive one for Wallace, because she sees the other ways that she's represented in culture, right? If I'm choosing between the stereotype of Superwoman and the stereotype of the welfare mom or the stereotype of the angry black woman, of course I'm going to choose a Superwoman. It's going to look more attractive and more seductive to me. But she says this is actually a problem because the expectations that she has to live up to as Superwoman are simply too much for anyone to realistically shoulder. So this is, again, the theoretical foundation for this new discussion of Michelle Obama's Superwoman. All of this groundwork was laid decades ago by black feminist scholars who came before me. How do some of those older representations play out, right? The National Review cover on the left here. This is a classic angry black woman photograph, right? And what's significant about this article written by Stein is he takes issue with Michelle's anger, especially because Michele has graduated from elite universities, gained financial security, and the admiration of the American public. So Stein's argument is that she has no right to be angry because she has made it. The significance of this argument, I think, right, is that it demonstrates one of the core contributions of intersectionality theory, which is that your privilege in one arena does not protect you from being assaulted via avenues in another arena, right? So just because Michelle's made it, just because she has financial security, and just because many people adore her, that does not protect her from racist and sexist attacks. So the idea that just because you've made it to a great school like UF, or just because you have a great job, that's not safety. That doesn't disqualify you from calling out racial injustice or other forms of injustice when you see it. So again, angry black woman stereotype on your left. And on your right, you have another image, right? And this is another image where the intersectionality of representations of Michele is clear for everyone to see. We can look at this image, which is an exaggeration. It's satirical. It wasn't meant to be an insult, but it was read as insulting by Michele and others. We can look at this image and say, it's clearly hinting at some sort of racist stereotype that has to do with blackness. But the point I want to point out, right, the thing I want to point out is that to get to the meaning of the racial stereotype or the racist stereotype for Barack and Michele, you have to combine race with different things. So for Barack, right, the meaning of the stereotype is dependent on some of the other visual images in the picture. It's dependent on religion, right? There's a religious connotation to the way he's being portrayed. It's dependent on nation as a discourse, right? You see the American flag burning in the fireplace, right? Those are the things that give the stereotype about Obama as a kind of Muslim extremist, right? Those are the things that give that stereotype its meaning for Barack. But for Michele, race is combining with other things, right? It's combining with a gender performance that is not commonly associated with women, right? She's a very masculine, sort of militant figure, right? It's combining with a particular historical social movement in the Black Panthers, right? These things are combining with race for Michele in a fundamentally different way than they're combining with race for Barack. So the fact that, yes, we know it's racist, it's a racist depiction, to get to the meaning of the racism, to get to the meaning of the stereotype, you have to go outside of race and look at gender, and look at nation, and look at religion. Michele is Superwoman. Michele is Superwoman. One of the ways we get to this discourse about Michele as Superwoman is that there's been an obsession about her physical traits, her body. Right? And we can see this here. Right? We can see Elmo admiring Michele's arms. We have a nonstop conversation about Michele's hairstyle, about her wardrobe. We have legislators like a Republican lawmaker from Kansas suggesting that she was disqualified from commenting on health and wellness because her butt was too big to be a fitness expert. So this hyper-focus on her body, right, and her physical power, her traits, is one way that we get the kind of Superwoman myth swirling around her. And another way is this way I sort of mentioned before. These are real comic books, by the way, right? Another way that we get this Superwoman myth is she's placed in the company of other successful, high-profile women who are the products of the feminist movement, right? Proof that women can, quote-unquote, have it all. They can have the beautiful wardrobe, the job, the power, either political power or financial power if they're professionals in other realms, right? So all of these reasons, right, both the physical component and the more sort of financial, social component of superwomanhood, Michele gets looked up at as a woman who has it all. Not everyone, of course, is thrilled with Michele's status.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Bradley Herring. Over the weekend, First Lady Michelle Obama and Dr. Jill Biden served as grand marshals for a NASCAR event. When introduced, they were greeted with a mixture of boos and cheers from the crowd. Today, Rush Limbaugh sounded the dog whistle to explain the crowd's reaction.
The question is, what the hell is there to cheer for when Miss Obama and Miss Biden show up? NASCAR people, as are most people in this country, are mature, tolerant people who fully understand when they're being insulted and condescended to. The First Lady has to take her own Boeing 757 with family and kids and hangers-on 4 hours earlier than her husband, who will be on his 747. NASCAR people understand that's a little bit of a waste. They understand it's a little bit of uppity-ism.
Right, now, the uppity-ism, right, that insult, right, that's got a long history, right? Traced back to the idea that black folk who had the audacity to look white folks in the eye were being presumptuous. That's an uppity-ism, right? They were moving beyond their proper station in life. So this pushback, again, similar to the pushback that Stein gives Michele for complaining, this pushback against Michele as a superwoman who is revered is rooted, again, in the notion that she's made it, she's flaunting her wealth, she's flaunting her power, and she's wasting taxpayers' time and money with her sort of public performance. The significance of this is, not only is the superwoman stereotype sort of untrue, and it's a standard that no one should be held up to, but as I'm going to argue in just a moment, it actually conceals the continued inequality merely along the lines of gender when we look at statistics among black folks when it comes to health, wealth and income, etc. Right? So holding Michele up as a superwoman has a function of disguising the gender inequality within the racial and ethnic group. And you can see that here, right? Where a higher percentage of women than men remain in poverty. Despite the fact that we're celebrating Michele as superwoman, these are the real facts on the ground, right? Does everyone know who Trayvon Martin is? Show of hands. Okay? And you all might know this image better than most, because does anyone know who this woman is? Okay. Marissa Alexander, right? The original Stand Your Ground controversy in this state. But she gets no attention. She used a firearm against her husband who assaulted her and was sent to prison. Tried to use Stand Your Ground as a defense and failed. It was not national news. And her invisibility, I want to suggest, is another symptom of holding up Michele as Superwoman, of saying that black women have made it and have no need for our concern, our attention. Right? Show of hands if you've heard of Black Lives Matter. Okay. Show of hands if you recognize these three women. Again, note the disparity. Right? The woman on the far right is Alicia Garza. She was the first person to ever tweet the Black Lives Matter hashtag. These are her colleagues, Patricia Cullors on the far left, Opal Tometi in the center. These are the activists with whom she built much of the organizational structure that became the Black Lives Matter social movement, providing buses to go to Ferguson, for example. Nobody knows these women's names and faces. Again, I want to suggest the Superwoman image, right, the celebration of Michele as someone who has made it, erases these stories, erases the accomplishments of other black women in many cases. What are we to do about this? And what has Michele done? How has she herself managed these pressures? I think one thing that we can't underestimate, and that she talks about, and we'll hear from her in just a moment, is the way she has publicly performed love and intimacy with her husband. This is significant for several reasons. First, because we know that many of the images in pop culture that are sold of black people interacting with each other, in particular as sexual beings, are hypersexualized and objectified images. So to see black love represented in this way on stage for the entire American public to consume and view and reflect on is deeply important. And secondly, right, it pushes back against those four controlling images that Patricia Hill Collins identified earlier in the talk, that I talked about earlier in the talk, all of which revolve in some way around black women's sexuality. So to claim it in this way, I want to suggest, is a revolutionary act for Michele. And she talks about its significance here as well.
So have you made it clear that, look, I know you're running for president, but date night still applies?
Oh, absolutely. That's all part of it. You know, it's all part of the reminder that, you know, this family is not just, you know, two folks raising kids, but it's two people building a life together. But, you know, the good thing is that we have practice with this long-distance stuff. And I think that, you know, what people don't understand is Barack, you know, was in the state senate for several years, which is not in Chicago. It's in Springfield. And there's no direct plane that goes there. You've been there many times, so it's a good commute. We've been in Washington for several years before he ran. So we learned how to sustain our relationship at a distance, which is why carving out that time, making sure we have Friday or Saturday date nights, and making sure that it's not just going to a movie, because you can't talk at a movie, Roland. You can't ask the questions and look them in the eye.
No, I've seen some folks talk at movies.
Well, we don't talk in the movie. So we usually go out to dinner. And what I found, which is interesting, is that our girls like it. You know, my oldest daughter, now that she's 10, she's very precocious and now can really articulate how she feels about this stuff. And she says, you know, it makes me feel good to see you and Dad hold hands. You know, and we forget about that. Well, we think, you know, that they don't care about that. But they like the fact that we take time, that they know that we love each other.
Because they see intimacy.
That gives them security. So sometimes you lose sight of that when you think, well, as long as we're taking care of the kids are okay. Well, the kids want you to have a life together. They want to know that my mother and father love each other, and if they love each other that much, they're going to love me. So that was, she just made that statement over the last months, and we kind of looked at each other like, wow, So for all the parents out there, have your date nights.
I think this is a significant clip, right? Because it demonstrates her awareness of the symbolic importance, right, of these kinds of acts of intimacy that she engages with in her husband. She's talking about it here specifically in the context of her own family. But she knows, she must know, right, that it is not just her children that are the audience for so many of these public acts that she goes with, that she sees, that she performs. And her willingness, in spite of the criticism, right, in spite of the fact that when she dapped her husband up on stage, they called it a terrorist fist jab, right, in spite of the fact that her hairstyle and her arms and her wardrobe is analyzed at every turn, she dances with him. She brushes crumbs off of his cheek. She interacts in ways that publicly demonstrate her love. I don't think we should underestimate the value of such revolutionary acts for a black woman in her station. And in addition to those smaller, more subtle acts of resistance, later in her career, and you see the date here, this is a very recent speech that she gave, she has directly addressed the stereotypes in ways that she hasn't done early on in her career. Let's see if I can, I'm not sure if I can scroll this forward to the place where I would like it to go.
Rest themselves. You worked hard for those seats. Let me start by thanking President John.
You have to excuse me for just a moment. Is there a way to scroll further in the video? I know you. Yeah, okay. So we're not going to be able to get to it because it's 12 minutes into the clip. But but here's what happens, right? She actually goes through one by one and addresses many of the insults that she's been subjected to. She talks about the quote-unquote terrorist fist jab. She talks about the big butt comment. She talks about the New Yorker cover that I showed before. And she talks about her own insecurity. She says at one point in the clip, "Is this how people are seeing me?" This is the insecurity that she felt when she first assumed the office. And she has now come to a place where she says, she asked herself what's important to her, who is she really, right? And the answer that she gave herself was that she's a mother first, and then she's First Lady of the country. And that prioritization of family, not because of some kind of external pressure to embody motherhood or to correct some myth about black motherhood, but because that's who she believes herself to be. A powerful, powerful statement given the history of black women and motherhood in this country. And the courage in a forum like this that she knows is being videotaped. Again, this is more of the kind of second semester Obama, right? Where second term Obama, where they seem to be stepping out on the ledge a little bit more. To engage these stereotypes and these discourses more directly, I think, is a massive step in the right direction. And that leads us to ask, sort of, what's next? What other forms of resistance might we see? If she's given us some of the symbolic acts in the public display of intimacy, her treatment of family, and she's given us now some of the substantive acts in her actual analysis of the stereotypes, what else might we ask of her to give us to push back against stereotypes and racism directed against black women? I think one of the things that's left, and one of the more dangerous arenas for Michele or Obama to enter, right, is to let that anger show a little bit more in public. It's righteous discontent, right? Audre Lorde writes about the uses of anger. And her argument is that an angry response to racism is nothing more than an appropriate response to the violence that's being directed against you. If you continue to suppress it, you will never meet racism with the force and the power it deserves. So if we can dream, right? If we can ask yet another thing of Michele, perhaps righteous discontent is a gift she will give us sometime in the near future. But if not, maybe she'll go on to host a talk show or be president of a university or something like that. That's all I've got for right now. I'm happy to take questions about Michele or any other piece of the book. Please. Indeed, and she had to walk away from it, right? So in the first campaign, the 2008 campaign, at a campaign stop, she said something like, "This is the first time I've been proud of my country." And the crowd at the campaign event applauded, and she was pilloried, right, by the news media for shaming America in that way, right, for not having pride, for being ungrateful, the same sort of thing that we heard before. And she then walked it back the next day and said, "Well, I've always been proud to be an American, but I've just been so inspired to see as many new kinds of people mobilize in this particular election." That was how she kind of reframed it. So it's there, but she hasn't really let it show yet. And you know what? This is kind of an unfair ask of her, right? Isn't it? To give such a performance in her station, especially in an election year when anything she says or does is going to be used against the next candidate. But I just wonder where spaces for anger in black public life are other than in the entertainment arena. Did anyone see Kendrick Lamar's? Exactly, they have an anger translator, that's right. Another question or two?
If you would please come to the microphone to ask your question. We're streaming and recording, and your question is not heard if you don't come up. So if you would come in, please give your name and ask your question. Come on.
Hi, I'm Lauren. Something that you said about the Superwoman, I thought that was really interesting because I've never heard that stereotype before. And it just reminded me of something that I saw online the other day. I was reading comments on Facebook, which was probably a bad idea to begin with. It was on a video of Beyonce, something controversial about her performance at the Super Bowl. And I saw someone say that African Americans are on the same playing field as white people. And look at Beyonce, look at Kanye, look at, you know, all of these African American celebrities that are, you know, making it, and they just said that race is now equal, like completely equal, and I just thought it was kind of really ignorant and surprising that people can still think that. So I wanted to see what you had to say about that and how that relates to like the Superwoman. Yeah,
well, I thank you for your question. I think you've said much of it, right? It's pretty ignorant to say that. I mean, all you have to do is look at any of the sort of most important measures of health and wellness, economics, employment, incarceration. Institutional racism is quite strong, right? So sociologically speaking, such a statement isn't true. But the surprising part, it's ignorant, but it's not surprising, right? Because when people of color reach this sort of status, they often get held up as evidence that we don't need any further remedy for institutional racism, right? That was what spurred all the talk about post-racialism, and you're seeing that narrative play out again in the case of Beyonce and the Super Bowl, I suppose. It's foolishness.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Mark. I'm a political science and philosophy student here. You talked a little bit about cases of like Marissa Alexander and the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how Michelle Obama's image as a superwoman erases the things they do, either their challenges or victories. Can you talk more about how that process works and why, like someone is prominent in a position like Michelle Obama, like her success, why it would diminish?
This is a wonderful question. Did everyone hear the question? Right? I'm going to say it again because it's such a wonderful question. How exactly do the accomplishments of women like Michelle Obama erase the struggles or accomplishments of the other women that I pointed out in the talk, Marissa Alexander or Timeti Cullors and Garza, who are three founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think one of the things that's at play here is that Michelle Obama gives corporations something they can sell. Right? They give J. Crew a pitch person. They give news programs something to talk about that they know viewers will want to see. They give people in mainstream media something to write about that they know people want to read. So there's, how many Obama PDA, public display of affection slideshows were there on Huffington Post and Variety and E in 08 and 09 when Obama's first took office, right? These are attractive images and narratives for consumption that make us feel good when we click them and buy things related to them. That kind of attention, right, does not translate when you're talking about the hard work of social organizing that Garza, Cullors, and Timeti are doing. It doesn't translate when you're talking about the injustice that Marissa Alexander and so many other black women who were failed by the criminal justice complex have to deal with. There's nothing to buy there to make you feel good about yourself. And that's what I worry about. The commercialization and the celebration, right, comes to be a representative of all black women's experiences, despite the stuff that's really going on the ground. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it has to do with the comfort. It's easy to look through those slideshows and like a happy, positive thing where stand your ground laws or Black Lives Matter movements they're uncomfortable for people and they don't want to have to address them and think about it. Where Michelle Obama is great is just kind of an easy thing to consume.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, good evening. My name is Selena Powell, and I'm currently an African American Studies major. And ironically, I actually did research on this last semester, the Strong Black Woman Syndrome. And I wanted to ask a question because you mentioned earlier about touching on Michelle Alexander and reserving emotional strength, and there's almost an expectation to be strong. I totally agree with this, and I think it's a cycle that needs to be broken in the black family. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how can black women reverse the strong black woman syndrome?
That's a wonderful question. Everyone hear it, right? I think part of the answer to your question is it's not solely black women's responsibility, right? Taking up for black women and for social justice issues that impact black women has to be the charge of everyone in the room, and in particular, the people with whom black women come into contact most, the people who share the labor burden, right, of raising kids, providing a household, etc. Now, what's interesting, of course, about this is that these narratives about black familial pathology, which have been around for decades, are half-truths at best and mostly lies. So the Center for Disease and Control Prevention in 2015 came out with a study on black fatherhood, right, which is often viewed as the kind of weak point of the black family. And they found that black dads help their kids with their homework more than white dads, that black dads believe in providing for their family more than white dads. All of these kinds of measures that directly go against the stereotypes of black fatherhood and what black families are about, CDC found them all. So in part, this is just it's a racist fantasy world that the black family is so pathological and dysfunctional, right? That's one piece of it. But the other side of it, right, is that we know sexism and the expectation that women be all things to all people is a real problem. Not that it's rooted in black familial pathology, not that that's what caused the problem, but that expectation that women do twice the work for half the recognition, right? That's common to all of us. And to place the responsibility for changing that on black women's shoulders seems to me to be a bit insane. How about placing it on legislators, giving us a sane parental leave policy, right? Catching up to the rest of the modern world, right, that provides a more sane parental leave policy. Or how about making sure that women are given equal pay for equal work in the workplace, right? Those are things, they shouldn't be black women's charge. Those are charges that we all should share, I think. great question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Suzanne, member of the community. I'm a black woman, obviously, and I haven't liked that Michelle Obama. Thing is, I don't know if the media emphasizes these things or she emphasizes these things about herself. Mm-hmm. I don't like that she gets on the floor and does push-ups with Jimmy Fallon on TV. I don't like her arms. I don't like the focus on her hair. I don't like that. I don't know if it's a matter of when she talks about education or other things of that nature, it doesn't get covered by the media. Mm-hmm. But I haven't liked that the first black first lady dances, is muscular, and she talks about her arms. I don't like it. Mm-hmm. And I don't relate to Michelle Obama.
Mm-hmm. That's certainly your opinion. You're welcome to your opinion. Not everyone has to like her. That's perfectly fine. I think, if I could just put some more words in your mouth, I think part of what you're reacting to and what you're saying perhaps is that her choice and the media's choice to emphasize these issues, like performances, right, might not be the best one. You would like to see her emphasizing other kinds of things, using her platform to do other kinds of things, or perhaps retreating into her background role, given that she's not an elected official. It's perfectly fine for you to want those things. But I think that Michelle is in a unique position, both as First Lady and as the most prominent black woman in the country. And the privilege that she has is to do what she wants to do. To assume, and this is the other thing I think people get twisted about, we have a hard time picking apart who makes which choices in terms of public performances for the president and Michelle. So are her handlers telling her to go on the Ellen DeGeneres show and dance? Or is that just who she is? And if it is who she is, which her Tuskegee remarks suggest, then who are any of us, to place additional expectations on her? So you're welcome to your opinion, but it's quite possible that she's not doing it for public consumption. That's just who she is and how she likes to interact with people. And most people like the dancing anyway, so I know. That's not a question that I can answer. Who she really is. I can only take her at her word. Another one?
Back again. I just wanted to hear what you had to say about Kendrick Lamar's performance the other night at the Grammys, because I heard you start to say his name. Yes, well, I think I brought it. Did I bring it up in reference to the Beyonce thing, or was it just on my mind? Yeah, so the Lamar performance was, I don't know, for those of you who saw it. Right, so Kendrick Lamar, for those of you who don't know, is a rap artist. He's given several stirring live performances on television before, on the Stephen Colbert Show, for example, on Saturday Night Live, for example, and most recently on the Grammys, he opened his performance with a very sort of dramatic scene that involved him and his fellow background dancers being incarcerated, and he sort of raps his way out of the chains and then moves on to a performance of a song called All Right, which has become an anthem for Black Lives Matter. It was stunning, really. I wouldn't call it enjoyable, and I think that was sort of the point, right? I mean, isn't that what so much of art is supposed to do, is make us uncomfortable, right? I think what's especially significant about it is that it comes right after the release of Beyonce's Formation video, which was another sort of landmark moment, I think, in black popular culture, where the kind of visual imagery that went along with the music was designed to interrupt traditional notions about blackness, black poverty, and black suffering, and present Beyonce in an entirely new light. And for Lamar to use the Grammy stage, where artists are being celebrated, and it is a mostly white space, to make that statement, I think is pretty courageous, and a wonderful compliment, at least for me as a teacher, to Beyonce's performance. It was a really great performance. Everyone should watch it.
Yes, please. Homework.
My name is Kole. When you were talking about narratives,
yeah,
I was wondering whether you were also going to throw back a little bit, further back, when during the slave period, men were beaten silly in the presence of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it was said that from that day onwards, or from that period and that moment onwards, the whole dysfunctionality within the black family started. And I can see a person like Michele as one of the pillars for the healing process of the black woman and the reclaiming of black womanhood, or the reclaiming of the humanity of black womanhood. There have been others before her also who could be seen as part of the healing process. Now, for this healing to be complete, for this dysfunctionality that I think was a result of the enslavement, for it to be complete, what do you see in the future? How do you think that this healing can be complete? One. Two, you've told us a lot of, you've revealed narratives, media narratives of Obama that do not really look very palatable. And they're constructed anyway from what you have said. If I were to put you on the spot, that to give us a narrative that we are not too used to, that you want us to consume and go away with about this woman, Michele, what would you be saying to us? Have I been fair enough?
Yes, absolutely. I'll try to answer them in order. Okay, so the first question about the healing of the black family, the abuses and the violence of slavery, right, and how that has sort of laid the groundwork for further dysfunctionality. I want to be cautious here and perhaps push back a bit, because I think that when we look at any of the contemporary challenges that black families face, they are rooted not in some sort of magically passed down cultural dysfunction, but in deliberate state acts that prevent black people, whether they are attached to families or not, from living healthy, financially sustainable lives. So fixing the black family, I don't think, is a psychic problem or a cultural problem. I think it flows directly from discrimination in the labor market, the evisceration of the public schooling system, the unjust penalization and incarceration of black people of all ages and multiple generations, especially in the latter half of the 20th century. Those structural and institutional interruptions, that's what we need for healing. I don't want to go into the psychoanalysis of what black folks think of their families. I don't think that's where the answer is. That's my answer to the first question. The second question about what should we walk away from the Michele era kind of thinking about her. A couple of different things, right? One is, I would recommend going back and reading the things that she's written and said. So there are a couple of places you can find this. You can find the texts of her speeches on the internet, for sure. You can also go back and read her thesis, what she did as an undergraduate at Princeton University. And she talks about in that thesis what it's like to feel out of place at an elite institution as a young woman of color, right? So I think we owe that to her. Even though we know she's part of the campaign and she has handlers and advisors and they have groups that conduct polling, I think we owe her the respect to at least acknowledge the possibility that she believes some of what she's written and said. Starting from the other place, where we're immediately skeptical and dismissive and everything she says is this big dog and pony show, I don't think that's fair, kind of as an intellectual project. That's one thing I would say. The second thing I would say, and we were just having a discussion about this in the reception room prior to coming down here, is one of the things I hope we can do a little bit better from now on, whether it's Michele and the Obamas or presidents that come after, is wait a little while to pass judgment before we start talking about legacy and impact and all of these things, right? Because people want to pass judgment about the Obamas every 6 months, it seems like. A new legacy story about them is being written. So that answer to the question is kind of a cop-out, because I'm just saying, wait a while. Just wait a minute. I understand it's a little bit of a cop-out, but I do hope that we can exercise a little bit more patience before passing judgment on what the legacies of these public figures might look like.
I agree with you, but just one last thing, and that
this
is,
will be your last comment.
would you be fair to say you do not agree that there's something called slavery traumatic syndrome, that this trauma of the past that has not been treated and has not been healed and could have found its way really deep down into a psyche? Would it be fair to say you don't believe that because you just said you would rather shift it onto the economy? And for those of us who believe that even the spirituality of being conditions the way you attend to economics and to social and to cultural ideas, would probably differ a little. Thank you.
I'm not a scholar of spirituality or psychic trauma, so these aren't my areas. But I would say that I do not believe in those explanations for contemporary black suffering and racial oppression.
And this will be our last question.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Michael Martinez. I'm on the faculty in political science here, so welcome to UF. So I want to try to deconstruct your theoretical argument a little bit and ask how what intersectionality adds to just a sectionality kind of argument here. As you mentioned in your opening, the office of First Lady is this peculiar office, right? But there have been other First Ladies who we might think of as superwomen, or right. So Jackie Kennedy comes to mind, Hillary Clinton to some extent as a First Lady, and so a feminist might look at those examples and say that our expectations are that a woman can have everything. She can raise her kids and be fluent in French and be an ambassador for her husband and do all of these things and be a successful citizen and woman. So given that, how does intersectionality add to your argument?
I think the intersectionality piece, in particular when it comes to Michele, is significant because of the standing, right, the regard with which we hold sort of black celebrity in particular in popular culture, and the physicality as a component of black superwomanhood that I think is key to the meaning of Michele's black superwomanhood, that I don't think is key to the meaning of someone like Hillary Clinton's, for example, right? The focus on the body, in particular, I think is another dimension of this problem. Perhaps, and not that, of course, women from many different racial and ethnic groups have to deal with objectification and that sort of lens, right? But the focus on Michele's physical power as an imposing figure, black transgression and black danger being linked to that sort of physical stature, I think plays into this idea of black superheroes, right? And you look at the other sort of black superheroes in the pantheon of American popular culture, right? The LeBron Jameses, right? Those kinds of people. I think there's a relationship there, an obsession with the physical that Michele shares and doesn't share. But so that's one example that's particular to Michele's superwomanhood. The other thing, though, is, again, tracing the intellectual lineage of these arguments about superwomanhood back to black feminist scholarship, I think is an important move, because the kinds of pressures those scholars are talking about are not the same kinds of pressures of superwomanhood that white feminist scholars are talking about. They're not. This emotional reserve, financial pressure, and a pressure to, again, heal the black family, that's not the same discussion as white superwomanhood because of class privilege and because of racial privilege. And I think it's important to preserve that intellectual tradition and bring that lens to bear rather than solely the kind of liberal white feminist analysis. Is that?
Yep. Thank
you. Thank you. I want to again thank you all for coming out, and I want to again acknowledge Dr. Jeffries. for that excellent presentation. And remind you that tomorrow, Dr. Frederick Harris of Columbia University will be speaking as a second speaker as part of our Barack Obama Symposium. And also keep in mind there are refreshments upstairs. So thank you all very much for coming out. Thank you.